Under the blazing desert sun, a wounded K-9 staggered into the headlights, bleeding, barking, desperate to stop the car. Behind him, in the 140-degree heat, lay a police officer shot, abandoned, left to die. And here's the chilling secret. The attack didn't come from criminals. It came from within the very force sworn to protect the town. Stay with me for just one more minute, and I'll tell you how a veteran, an 8-year-old boy, and this dying dog uncovered a conspiracy that shook their town to its core. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and tap the bell so you never miss a story of silent heroes like this. Leave a comment below. What would you have done if that dog had stopped your car in the storm? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And wherever you're watching from, I hope your day is filled with warmth and courage. The Mojave stretched endlessly beneath a merciless sun, its horizon trembling like a mirage that refused to hold still. Heat rose in ghostly ribbons from the asphalt, twisting the air until the world looked like a dream half burned away. The hum of cicadas was the only sound brave enough to exist in that kind of silence. Even the wind had given up. It was the kind of afternoon that could make a man question if he was still alive, or just moving through the memory of something that once was. Raymond Cole, 55, sat behind the wheel of an old Ford truck that rattled with every mile. Dust clung to the windows, coating the world in a dull amber haze. His face, angular, sun-bitten, and mapped with fine lines, stayed fixed on the road ahead. He wore the expression of a man used to long drives and longer silences, the kind that linger even after the engine dies. His left hand rested on the wheel, tan skin marked by the white line of a scar that ran across his knuckles, a souvenir from a place that still followed him home in dreams. Afghanistan had given him a chest full of medals and a mind full of ghosts. He'd come to the desert for peace, but quiet, he'd learned, could roar louder than any battlefield. The truck's engine whined under the heat. A crumpled map lay on the passenger seat beside an old canteen and a pair of aviator glasses that hadn't seen polish in years. Raymond's mind wandered between the rhythmic hum of the tires and the ache that lived behind his ribs, the one that had nothing to do with age. He thought of the small, rented room he was headed toward in the next town over, of the radio he never turned on, and of the faces he had long since stopped talking to. The desert didn't ask questions, and that's why he liked it. It just took what you brought and buried the rest. Then, something flickered at the edge of the horizon, a shape moving against the current of heat. At first, he thought it was a mirage, another cruel trick of light and exhaustion. But as it grew closer, the illusion hardened into motion. A figure staggered into the center of the road, low to the ground, unsteady, deliberate. Instinct made his foot slam against the brake. Tires screamed, dust rose like a curtain, and for a heartbeat the world went still. When it cleared, Raymond saw it. A German shepherd, large and muscular once, but now barely standing. Its coat, sable black streaked with dust and blood, shimmered beneath the sunlight. Each breath was a struggle, ribs lifting and falling in a rhythm that hurt to watch. The dog took a half step forward, paws trembling, then barked, a sound half choked, half command. It wasn't fear, it was warning. Raymond's training from years past rose unbidden, the voice of discipline cutting through confusion. Assess, move, act. He opened the truck door, and the heat hit him like a wall. The soles of his boots hissed against the baked asphalt. He walked slowly, one hand out, his body angled low, voice calm but firm. Easy now. I'm not here to hurt you. Up close, the dog's eyes told a story words couldn't. They were sharp amber, glazed with exhaustion but burning with something older. Duty, loyalty, refusal. Around its neck, the collar was half melted, the leather singed black, the tag barely legible. K-9 unit. Max. The name hung in the air like a memory he hadn't earned the right to say. Max swayed once, his hind leg buckling, then forced himself upright again, as if the act of falling was worse than dying. Blood slicked the fur beneath his chest, dripping onto the road where it hissed and vanished into steam. Raymond knelt, the heat pressing down on him like armor he couldn't take off. He could smell the iron in the air, the kind that always followed the sound of gunfire. When he reached out, Max didn't flinch. The dog's gaze fixed on him, pleading but resolute, as though deciding in that moment whether this stranger was worthy of his last breath. Then, from somewhere beyond the horizon, the wind carried a sound, faint, human, and full of pain. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't the desert's trick. It was a cry, buried under layers of heat and distance. Raymond rose, squinting against the glare. The air warped the world ahead into waves of light, but in the shimmer, something metallic caught the sun. A reflection buried halfway under the dunes. A flash, a car, maybe. A wreck. The kind that had been there too long. Max turned his head toward the same direction, his ears twitching, his body trembling. Then, with a sound between a growl and a gasp, he took a limping step forward, stopped, and looked back at Raymond. The message was wordless, but clear as an order. Follow me. Raymond's hand went to his chest, feeling the weight of the old dog tag he still wore beneath his shirt. He didn't believe in signs, but the heat didn't lie. Something was out there. Someone. And that someone didn't have long. He hesitated only a second, scanning the horizon where the mirage trembled like smoke. The sky shimmered white. The road ahead bled into the sand, and the world narrowed to the sound of his own heartbeat. He reached into the truck, grabbed his canteen and a roll of gauze from the glove box, then set off after Max. The dog limped steadily through the heat, every movement an act of defiance. His paws left faint trails of blood that darkened the sand. Raymond followed the prints, boots crunching against the gravel, the sun clawing at the back of his neck. Sweat stung his eyes, the air thick with dust and something else. Anticipation, maybe. The silence was so deep it felt alive, pulsing between heartbeats. After 10 minutes of walking, the shimmer ahead began to take shape. The metallic glint grew into something solid, a twisted frame of metal half swallowed by sand. The remains of a police SUV, its paint peeled by heat, its doors caved in. The windows were shattered, glass glittering like tears. A faint line of smoke rose from the hood, disappearing into the sun-bleached air. Raymond slowed, instinct warning him that whatever he found next would change everything. Max reached the wreck first, stumbling but relentless. He sniffed around the open door, then barked once, low and urgent. Raymond moved closer, shielding his face from the glare. Inside, he saw movement, barely. A hand, pale, shaking, dangling from the driver's side. His heart kicked hard against his chest. He stepped forward, grabbed the handle, and pulled. The metal burned his skin through the glove. The door creaked open, and the smell of blood and oil spilled into the air. There, slumped against the seat, was a man in uniform. Mid-30s, short brown hair matted with sweat, the side of his face smeared red. The badge on his chest read, J. Walker, Red Mesa PD. His lips were cracked, his chest shallow. His left arm was twisted beneath him, and his right hand clutched something. A broken radio, its signal light blinking weakly. Raymond reached in, 2 fingers to the neck. A pulse. Faint, but fighting. He looked at Max, who now stood beside the wreck, panting hard, his sides heaving. The dog's eyes flicked between him and the officer, back and forth insistently, as if saying, "Now you see why I called you." The air trembled with heat. The world was still except for the sound of Max's labored breathing and the far-off whisper of wind curling over dunes. Raymond knew this wasn't luck. It wasn't coincidence. He was never meant to find peace out here. The war had just changed uniforms. He pressed his palm to the sand, feeling its sear burn into his skin, and for the first time in years, he felt purpose again. Not the kind born of orders, but of something older. Obligation. Humanity. Far above, the sun hung suspended in a sky without mercy. The mirage around them pulsed, bending light and distance until it was hard to tell what was real. Raymond looked once more at Max, at the reflection of his own face in those amber eyes, sweat and dust, and the faint glint of an old soldier's defiance, and he understood. He wasn't rescuing a stranger. He was walking straight back into the kind of war that never ends. One fought not with guns, but with conscience. The air burned as Raymond moved closer to the wreck. The police SUV was half swallowed by the dune, its frame twisted like something the desert had decided to keep. Blue stripes peeled under the sun, metal creaked faintly as the heat expanded it. The smell was sharp, hot rubber, blood, and the metallic sting of oil dripping onto sand. Flies gathered on the shattered windshield, their buzzing the only thing brave enough to disturb the silence. Even the wind had gone still, as if the Mojave itself was watching. He pressed a hand against the side of the wreck. The surface was searing. Through the open door, he could see movement, barely perceptible, a flicker of life clinging to a body slumped against the driver's seat. Raymond reached in, boots sinking into the loose sand, and caught the man under his arm. The uniform was stiff with blood, the badge dull under the sun. The chest plate, dented and torn, rose shallowly with every breath. The radio light blinked red, blinking and dying, a heartbeat that had forgotten what it meant to call for help. He worked the door open with a grunt. The hinges groaned, hot metal burning his palm through the glove. The man's head lolled toward him, a pale, sweat-slicked face with a week's worth of stubble and the kind of weariness that only comes from duty gone wrong. His lips were cracked, eyes half open but unfocused. When Raymond leaned closer, he caught a whisper, so faint it barely rose above the hum of heat. Pierce. Ambush. Not cartel. Our own. The words broke apart like dry leaves in wind. Then the officer's chin dropped, and for a terrifying second, Raymond thought he was gone. But when he pressed 2 fingers to the side of his neck, there it was, a pulse, fragile and defiant, thudding against the desert's silence. Raymond turned his head toward Max. The dog stood at the open door, posture tense, tail stiff as a drawn line. His ears flicked toward the horizon, nostrils flaring. Every few seconds, his gaze cut to Raymond, as though reading his thoughts, urging him to move faster. Raymond didn't need to be told twice. Years of training had carved a reflex deeper than instinct. He pulled the med kit from the truck, the leather cracked and sun-bleached from years of neglect. His shirt came off in one quick motion, cotton tearing as he ripped it into strips. He worked fast, pressing gauze against the wound, wrapping the torso tight enough to slow the bleeding without breaking what was left of breath. The air shimmered around them. Sweat rolled down his back in rivers. Every move felt like fighting the sun itself. "Stay with me," he muttered, not sure who he was talking to. The man, the dog, or himself. He dragged the officer free from the wreck, each pull leaving long red marks that baked instantly on the sand. The man was heavier than he looked, the dead weight of someone halfway between worlds. Raymond's breath came ragged, heart pounding, the old ache in his shoulder screaming. But the alternative, leaving him there, wasn't an option. When he laid the man down beside the truck, the badge caught the sunlight. J. Walker. He didn't know the name, but the title was enough to matter. Police. One of their own. He glanced at Max, whose chest rose and fell in quick, shallow bursts. The dog's gaze followed Walker's hand, then lifted to Raymond's face as if to say, "Don't stop now." Raymond hoisted Walker up, one arm under the shoulders, the other gripping his belt. The movement tore something in his side, but he didn't stop. Max leapt onto the truck bed ahead of him, landing beside the open space, circling once before lying down. As Raymond laid Walker across the boards, Max pressed his muzzle against the officer's forearm, a low whine vibrating in his throat. It wasn't fear. It was insistence, a promise of protection. Raymond climbed into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, then caught with a roar. Heat shimmered off the hood. He took one last glance in the mirror before shifting into gear. The desert stretched ahead, an ocean of fire and silence. He pressed the pedal, the tires spitting dust, the truck groaning as if reluctant to leave the dead behind. They hit the main road within minutes, but it didn't feel like escape. It felt like exposure. The sun hung straight above, a white eye unblinking. Walker lay motionless in the back, his arm twitching now and then, a hand trying to remember how to hold on. Max sat beside him, head low, fur streaked with blood, his eyes locked on the horizon as if expecting an enemy to appear from the glare. Raymond gripped the wheel, his mind racing behind his steady expression. Pierce. Ambush, not cartel. Our own. The words replayed, twisting tighter each time. They painted a picture he didn't want to see, a picture he'd seen before in another war, where betrayal didn't wear the enemy's face. The radio on the dash crackled once, faint static, then silence again. He reached for it out of habit, stopped halfway. Whoever Pierce was, he wasn't ready to call for help. Not until he understood what he was driving into. The road cut straight through the desert like a scar. Each mile swallowed the last. Sweat dripped from his brow, stinging his eyes. He wiped it away, blinking hard. Then something in the mirror caught his attention, a faint smudge in the distance, rising slow and steady. Dust. At first he thought it was the trail from his own tires, blown back by the wind. But the shape grew darker, sharper. Another vehicle, low and fast, the glint of sun bouncing off tinted glass. He adjusted the mirror, watching the line of motion narrow the distance. Beside him, Max lifted his head, ears perked. The fur along his back bristled. He shifted position, staring through the rear window, a growl rumbling deep in his chest. Raymond didn't need to look again. He could feel it in his gut, the rhythm of pursuit. He pressed harder on the accelerator. The truck shuddered, engine protesting. The plume behind him stayed steady, deliberate, matching his speed. Whoever was out there knew how to hunt. Walker stirred in the back, a broken sound escaping his throat. Raymond glanced over his shoulder, saw the man's lips move again. No words this time, just breath and pain. Max leaned close, licking the officer's wrist, as if anchoring him back to the world. The veteran's jaw tightened. The wind roared through the half-open window, dragging sand into the cab. Ahead, the road shimmered, empty and endless. Behind, the shadow grew larger. For a heartbeat, the old ache of combat returned, the sense of being marked, watched, caught between duty and survival. Raymond's hands clenched around the wheel. His eyes met Max's reflection in the mirror, that same amber steadiness. Neither blinked. The horizon rippled. The road ahead was the color of bone. The truck roared forward through the furnace wind, carrying 3 souls, one broken, one bleeding, one haunted. And behind them, through the blur of heat, a black SUV emerged, windows tinted, moving too fast, too straight to be coincidence. The afternoon pressed down on Red Mesa like a slow, suffocating hand. The heat didn't just hang, it crawled. It filled the streets, shimmered off rusted truck hoods, and blurred the outlines of distant mesas until the whole town looked like it was melting into itself. Cicadas screamed from somewhere unseen, and even the stray dogs had given up the will to bark. Inside the dusty Spur diner, the ceiling fan turned with a tired squeak, slicing through the thick air that smelled faintly of grease and sunburnt metal. At a corner booth, Sheriff Dalton Pierce stirred his coffee, his movements deliberate, slow as a man with nothing left to prove. He was in his early 60s, tall but soft around the middle, the kind of build that once carried strength, but had traded it for authority. His tan uniform was pressed sharp, every button gleaming, but the edges of his badge were dulled from years of habit. Gray mustache trimmed to precision, sunglasses perched on the counter beside his hat. There was a quiet confidence in the way he held himself, like a man used to being obeyed without question. Yet beneath that calm, something darker rippled, invisible but felt. The radio on his belt crackled suddenly, its static cutting through the slow hum of the diner. "Officer Walker down. Possible ambush. No response from Unit 6. The deputy across from him, a young man named Harris, no older than 25, jerked upright, nearly spilling his iced tea. Freckles, short hair, eyes that still held that naive glint of believing the badge meant something pure. "Sir?" he asked, voice cracking with the heat and nerves. Dalton didn't flinch. He lifted the cup, took a slow sip, then set it down without a sound. "Copy that," he said into the mic, his tone low, almost soothing. Then he reached down and turned the radio off entirely. Harris blinked, confused. "Should I, call in backup? Alert the highway patrol?" Pierce's eyes slid up from his cup. The smile that touched his mouth was thin, calculated, a crack that never reached the eyes. "No need to stir panic," he said. "Accidents happen in this heat." The deputy hesitated. "But an ambush, sir? That's not—" "An ambush," Pierce interrupted, leaning back, "is a word people use when they don't know how to explain their own mistakes." He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice to a level that made Harris straighten in his seat. "And mistakes can get cleaned up. Understand?" The young deputy swallowed hard, nodding. "Yes, sir." Pierce smiled again, this time softer, almost fatherly. He picked up his hat, dropped a few bills on the counter, and stood. The sunlight hit his face as he opened the diner door, painting the sweat on his skin gold. "Good," he said. "Now finish your lunch. I'll handle this." Outside, the desert shimmered like liquid glass. He slipped his sunglasses back on and stepped into the heat. A distant dust trail rose, beyond the horizon, the same direction where a lone veteran's truck was cutting through the wasteland, carrying a dying man and a loyal dog who refused to surrender. By the time the sun dipped low, the road had swallowed its colors. Raymond's truck climbed the last stretch of dirt path toward a small cabin tucked between slabs of sandstone and sagebrush. The cabin was old, its boards grayed from years of storms and heat. The windows narrow and half-covered with wooden shutters. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. And shelter meant safety, even if only for a while. He parked beside the porch, cut the engine, and sat still for a moment. The world outside buzzed with crickets and wind. In the truck bed, Officer Walker lay motionless, skin pale under the flickering light of the dying sun. Max stood beside him, refusing to move, his fur caked with dust and blood. When Raymond approached, Max growled softly, not at him, but at the world, as if daring it to come closer. "It's all right," Raymond said, voice low, steady. "He's safe now." The dog's growl faded into a quiet whimper. Raymond lifted the officer's body, muscles trembling, and carried him inside. He laid him gently on the couch, a cracked leather thing that had outlived every owner before him, and began working by the light of a single oil lamp. Water, gauze, salt tablets, prayer. The rhythm of old habits came back like breathing. Max settled at the foot of the couch, eyes never leaving the officer. Every time Raymond reached for a new bandage, the dog's head followed, tracking his hands with silent suspicion. Raymond could feel the weight of that gaze, heavy and human. He'd known soldiers like that once, men who didn't trust words, only the actions that came after. Hours bled away. The lamp flickered lower. Sweat dripped from Raymond's jaw onto the floorboards, darkening the wood. Walker's breathing was ragged but steady, his skin glistening with fever. Raymond paused, pressing the back of his hand to the officer's forehead. Hot as fire. He reached for the canteen, trickled a few drops against Walker's cracked lips. The man stirred, eyes fluttering open, the whites stark against the shadows. His voice came rough, each syllable scraped raw. "They shot me because I found their shipments." He swallowed hard, breath catching. "Weapons, going to cartels. Sheriff runs it all." The words hung heavy in the cabin, thick as smoke. Raymond froze mid-motion, bandage half-wrapped in his hands. He didn't ask for clarification. He didn't need to. The way Walker's voice trembled told him everything. The kind of truth that gets a man buried without ceremony. Max let out a low growl, tail twitching, as if he too understood the danger that name carried. Sheriff. Raymond looked down at the half-conscious officer, the tremor of breath struggling in and out. "You're sure?" he asked quietly. Walker's eyes fluttered. "Pierce," he rasped. "Dalton Pierce. Tell them." But the rest dissolved into a cough that tore through his chest. His head fell back, and the cabin fell silent again. Raymond stood still, hands resting on his knees, staring at the floorboards until the knot in his stomach began to turn to steel. The old instinct inside him whispered what he already knew. You just stepped into another war. He walked to the window and looked out. The horizon was no longer golden, it was gray, fading into night. A storm was building far off, not the kind that brings rain, but one born of dust and electricity. He could smell it, the dry ozone tang of a desert thunder rolling miles away. The wind kicked up suddenly, rattling the shutters. The lamp's flame wavered, throwing Max's shadow across the wall, tall, watchful, like a guardian. Raymond turned back toward the couch, where the officer lay unconscious, his chest still rising faintly. He knew they couldn't stay long. Someone would come looking, not to rescue, but to erase. He reached down, ran a hand over Max's head. "You did good," he murmured. The dog's ears flicked, eyes heavy with exhaustion but unbroken. Outside, the storm whispered against the sand. And then, as if on cue, a pair of headlights swept slowly across the window, moving in a slow circle once, twice, like a predator tracing the scent of blood. Raymond killed the lamp. Darkness folded around them. The desert waited, holding its breath. The lights flickered once, then went dark. The sudden silence in the cabin felt heavier than the desert outside. Raymond didn't move at first. He simply listened. The faint hum of engines drifted in through the dry wind, low and patient, like the sound of wolves circling something that could still fight back. Max rose from the floor, growling deep in his chest, the fur along his back bristling. The air itself seemed to tighten, thick with the scent of sand and intent. Raymond reached for the lantern, turning the wick until the flame choked out. The darkness folded around them, a living thing. He could still hear Walker breathing faintly on the couch. A slow, uneven rhythm, the sound of a body trying to remember what it meant to survive. Raymond's hand brushed against the old Colt by the nightstand, the leather around its grip worn smooth by time. He slid it free, checked the chamber by touch. Old habits. Old ghosts. He moved to the window. Through the narrow slits of the blinds, he saw them. 2 police cruisers parked just off the main road, engines idling, lights off. The glow from their dashboards was faint but steady, like the eyes of something waiting to strike. He didn't need to see faces to know whose men they were. Dalton Pierce didn't delegate mercy. Max's growl deepened. Raymond crouched, hand on the dog's shoulder. "Quiet now," he whispered, voice barely a thread. Max's ears twitched. The sound faded to a low rumble in his throat. Raymond turned, scanning the room one last time. A few supplies, water canteens, a med kit, a blanket, his field compass. He packed quickly, each motion calculated, each sound deliberate. Walker stirred, eyes half open, sweat glinting on his temples. "They'll come," he rasped. "They already know." "I know," Raymond said softly. "We're leaving." He slung the pack over his shoulder, then leaned down to lift the officer. Walker's body was all weight and heat, the fever burning through him like wildfire. His breath hitched when Raymond adjusted his grip, but he didn't speak again. Max limped alongside, body tense, eyes trained on the door. Even injured, the dog's spirit hadn't dimmed. There was something almost sacred in that. Loyalty that defied reason. Outside, the wind had turned cruel. It scraped across the sand in sharp bursts, carrying the smell of dust and metal. Raymond moved in shadows, keeping low as he reached the truck. The cruisers stayed still in the distance, but he could feel their attention, a hunter's patience. He eased Walker onto the back seat, wrapping him in the blanket, fixing the oxygen mask over his face. The hiss of air was faint, but it was life. Max jumped into the passenger seat, panting hard, tongue streaked with dust. Raymond reached over and pressed a hand to his neck, feeling the pulse. Fast, but strong. "Hold tight," he murmured. The engine coughed once, twice, then came alive. Headlights stayed off. He rolled, forward, slow at first, the gravel crunching under the tires like whispers. They reached the dirt road that snaked away from the cabin. For a heartbeat, the desert seemed to open up before them, wide, endless, almost kind. Then the first gunshot cracked through the night. It hit the sand beside the truck, a spray of dust bursting near the tires. Raymond's grip tightened on the wheel, instincts kicking in before thought could catch up. He swerved hard, the truck fishtailing before straightening again. Max barked once, a sharp, defiant sound that split the air. Headlights flared behind them, two pairs moving fast, closing the distance. Raymond slammed the accelerator. The old Ford roared, spitting sand in long trails behind it. The wind tore through the open window, and the dunes lit up in flashes of passing light, ghostly shapes rising and vanishing as quickly as they appeared. Bullets followed, short bursts, aimed low, controlled. One clipped the side mirror, shattering it into a spray of glass that caught the moonlight like frozen fire. Another tore through the tailgate, leaving a jagged hole that whistled in the wind. Walker groaned in the back seat, half-conscious, and Raymond's jaw locked tighter. He'd driven under fire before. He knew the math of survival, speed, distance, nerve. He spotted the turn ahead, an old service road half buried by sand. No markings, no lights, just memory and instinct. He cut the wheel hard. The truck skidded, tires screaming, and plunged into the narrow track. The cruisers followed, their beams slicing through the dark, painting everything in cold, white panic. The canyon walls began to rise on either side, massive slabs of red rock that trapped the sound of engines and gunfire, echoing it back like thunder. The passage narrowed, forcing the vehicles into single file. Raymond kept low, body leaning forward, the truck jolting violently as it bounced over rocks. Max barked again, crouched low against the seat, eyes burning like coals. Another shot rang out, closer this time. The windshield spider-webbed at the corner, a thin crack splitting the glass. Raymond's heartbeat matched the rhythm of the bullets. The desert was alive now, roaring, the air filled with grit and gunfire. Then came the sound he'd feared, the engine sputtering, coughing under the strain. He gritted his teeth, gave it everything. The road narrowed again, twisting between walls of stone that glowed faintly under the moon. A flash of light, another shot. And then, before he could react, Max leapt from the window. Time fractured. Raymond barely saw it. Just the streak of motion, the blur of fur and sand, the explosion of dust as the dog's body collided with the pursuing cruiser. The impact sent the car veering sideways, tires screeching, a plume of sand engulfing it. The second cruiser swerved to avoid the first, clipping its bumper, spinning both into the ravine. The crash thundered through the canyon, followed by silence. Raymond slammed the brakes, tires digging deep into the sand. His heart hammered in his chest as the truck skidded to a halt. "Max!" His voice tore through the night, hoarse, desperate. He jumped out, boots sinking into the loose ground. The silence that followed was unbearable. Only the wind moved, carrying the smell of burned rubber and dust. Then, from the shadows ahead, Max emerged. The dog limped into the beam of the headlights, his body trembling, fur matted with blood. His right shoulder dragged, and every breath looked like it hurt. But his eyes, those amber eyes, were steady, alive, defiant. He took a few unsteady steps forward, then stopped, as if saying, "I'm still here." Raymond knelt, his hand trembling as he reached out. "You damn fool," he whispered, voice cracking. Max pressed his muzzle into his palm, a low whine breaking the stillness. The world around them blurred, sand, blood, headlights, all fading into one simple truth. Loyalty is the one thing you can't command, only earn. He lifted Max into the truck carefully, wrapping him in the same blanket that covered Walker. The engine idled softly, the night finally quiet again. For a moment, it felt like survival. Then, as Raymond turned to close the door, something caught his eye. a faint red blink beneath the chassis, steady and rhythmic. He crouched, brushing away sand, and there it was. A small metal device lodged near the axle, its light pulsing in the dark. A GPS beacon. It had been there long before tonight. The morning rose without color, the kind of light that felt more like surrender than beginning. The sky hung pale as bone over the desert, and even the wind seemed to move slower, as if exhausted from carrying too much heat and too many secrets. Raymond's truck rolled to a stop beside an abandoned ranger station, a squat concrete building half swallowed by sand and time. The sign out front had long faded, the word Ranger barely legible beneath the dust. But above the roof stood the one thing that mattered, a metal radio tower still standing against the sky, its rusted frame humming faintly with potential. He killed the engine, the silence closing in again, and sat there for a moment. Inside the cab, the air was thick with sweat and the faint metallic tang of blood. Walker lay in the back seat, his skin gray with fever, breath shallow and trembling. Max rested at his side, head on his paws, eyelids half closed but alert. Each time Walker stirred, Max's ears flicked up, a soldier's instinct reborn in fur and bone. Raymond knew what it meant to break radio silence. In the field, it had been the one rule he never questioned. Call for help, and someone will come. But so will the enemy. He looked toward the horizon, where the sand stretched endless and clean. The world felt suspended, as if holding its breath between danger and deliverance. He climbed out, boots sinking into the powdery ground. The wind was cool for once, carrying the faint smell of rain that would never come. His hands trembled as he adjusted the frequency on the old radio console inside the building. Dust motes drifted in the still air like slow burning sparks. He pressed the transmit button, his voice low, calm, deliberate. "This is Veteran Raymond Cole," he said. "Officer James Walker is alive. We have proof of corruption in Red Mesa PD. Request federal assistance. Immediate." The radio hissed, the static roaring like surf in a storm. He waited, heart beating against the silence. Then, faint through the static, came a voice. Calm, professional, and human. "Copy, Mr. Cole. Hold position. Do not engage. Help is en route." For the first time in days, Raymond exhaled. The sound was half relief, half disbelief. He turned toward the window, watching the pale horizon begin to shimmer under the rising sun. Maybe, just maybe, it would end here. Behind him, Walker stirred. The officer's voice came weak but urgent, fragments spilling out like broken code. "Pierce, shipments, coordinates, warehouse, Highway 67. His hand twitched, pointing vaguely toward the south. Fever sweat clung to his forehead. Raymond dabbed it away with the corner of a rag. "Easy," he murmured, but Walker's voice only grew fainter. "They'll cover it up. Tell them—" The words died before the sentence could finish. Raymond turned to Max, who had raised his head now, tail tapping weakly against the floor. "We'll make it count," Raymond said, softly. "I promise." The dog's amber eyes met his, calm and knowing, as if to say he already understood. He stepped outside, squinting into the brightness. The desert light was cruel, erasing all shadows but one, the one moving where it shouldn't be. Down the ridge, the horizon rippled with motion. Dust plumes rose, too heavy and uniform to be wind. Engines, distant but growing. His stomach tightened. The desert had decided. He grabbed the rifle from the truck bed, checking the chamber, then pulled Max behind a boulder near the edge of the ridge. "Stay low," he whispered, though Max was already pressed flat against the sand. The air vibrated now, the hum of engines building into a mechanical growl that rolled across the open plain. Then they appeared, 3 black SUVs slicing through the sand, sunlight flashing across their windshields like blades. The convoy moved with precision, too fast for chance, too organized for rescue. Dalton Pierce led the front vehicle. Even at a distance, Raymond could see the man's silhouette. The wide-brimmed hat, the stiff shoulders, the kind of posture that belonged to someone who thought he owned the world he walked on. When the convoy crested the ridge, the first SUV screeched to a halt, throwing sand in a wide arc. Doors opened. Men poured out, armed and silent. Dalton stepped forward. The sheriff's tan uniform was immaculate as ever, his boots polished, his smile thin and dry. The desert heat shimmered around him, warping his outline like smoke. His hand rested casually on the holster at his hip. "You should have kept driving, soldier," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the sand. "You just don't know when to quit." Raymond's finger brushed the trigger, but he didn't fire. Not yet. The wind shifted, carrying the sound of Dalton's boots crunching over sand. Every step closer felt like a lifetime replaying, the kind of slow, inevitable moment where morality and survival collide. Max growled low beside him, a sound too deep for his size, the echo of an animal who'd seen too much war. Then something else pierced the tension. Sirens, faint at first, high-pitched, almost indistinguishable from the desert wind. Then louder, closer, a wail that sliced through the silence like a warning flare. Dalton stopped mid-step, head tilting toward the sound. His deputies froze, scanning the horizon. Over the ridge behind Raymond, black vehicles appeared, different ones this time, sleeker, armored, unmarked but unmistakable. They came fast, tires shredding through the sand, the rising sun glinting off mirrored glass. When they fanned out in formation, the desert floor erupted into chaos. "FBI!" a voice bellowed through a loudspeaker. "Drop your weapons! Hands where we can see them!" Dalton turned sharply, his expression cracking for the first time. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered. One of his men raised a gun, but Dalton's hand shot up, stopping him. The arrogance that had carried him through decades of quiet corruption faltered, replaced by something colder, fear. The agents moved in fast, surrounding the convoy. Rifles leveled, orders shouted. The air was thick with sand and adrenaline. Raymond stayed behind the rock, weapons steady, watching it unfold with the calm detachment of a man who'd seen too many endings like this. Dalton's lips pressed into a line. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his hands. His deputies followed, their weapons clattering to the ground one by one. The sound echoed across the emptiness, a metallic rain marking the end of something rotten. And then, for the first time in weeks, the desert went silent again. Raymond lowered his rifle, the weight of it suddenly too heavy to hold. Max nudged his leg, pressing his head against Raymond's arm, seeking reassurance, or offering it. Maybe both. Raymond reached down, hand finding the dog's fur, rough and warm under his palm. Behind him, the sound of boots approached. An agent, mid-40s, dark suit, dust on his shoes and sweat streaking his collar, stepped forward. His face was sharp, his expression unreadable. He studied Raymond for a long moment before speaking. "You didn't just save a man, sir," he said quietly. "You cracked open a storm we've been chasing for 2 years." Raymond looked past him toward the ridge where the sky met the sand. The light was changing now, less cruel, almost kind. The storm had passed, but it had left its mark. He holstered the Colt, exhaled once, and let the desert breathe again. Dawn came softly, its light fragile as breath upon glass. The desert, once a kingdom of heat and vengeance, now lay quiet beneath a sky rinsed pale with morning. The wind that had once carried the taste of dust now carried the scent of water. The sprinklers outside the hospital had come alive, misting the parched ground with artificial rain. Inside, the hallways hummed faintly with machines and whispered voices, antiseptic and sunlight mingling into something that almost resembled peace. Raymond's boots clicked against the tiled floor as he walked slowly down the corridor. The echo measured, deliberate. He passed nurses with tired smiles and coffee cups, their scrubs the color of desert sage. A TV on the wall muttered headlines, words like corruption, arrests, Red Mesa. But he didn't stop to listen. The war had moved beyond him now. He turned into room 214. The curtains were drawn halfway, letting in a ribbon of gold light that spilled across the bed. Officer James Walker lay sleeping, a faint trace of color returning to his face, his bandaged arm resting gently on the sheet. The rise and fall of his chest was steady now, calm, human, alive. The machines around him blinked softly, their quiet rhythm a kind of prayer. At the foot of the bed lay Max. The German shepherd was stretched out on the cool linoleum, one leg wrapped in clean white gauze, his fur shorn in patches where the bullets had grazed him. His eyes, amber and patient, followed Raymond as he entered. For a moment he simply looked at the man who had carried him through fire and darkness, then let his head sink back down, satisfied, as if saying, "You made it too." Raymond pulled up a chair beside the bed and sat down heavily, the weariness of days catching up to him. He rubbed a hand over his face, feeling the rasp of unshaven stubble, the stiffness in his shoulders. It had been a long time since he'd allowed himself stillness, longer still since it had felt safe. He looked at the badge lying on the bedside table. Walker's name dulled by sand, but the metal still catching the sun. "Hero," the reporters had called the young officer. The word had echoed down the hallways, threaded through the headlines. But Raymond knew better. The real hero was lying on the floor, breathing quietly, the rhythm of his chest slow and deliberate. The kind of loyalty that didn't come from training or duty, but from something deeper, something earned in silence. The door creaked open behind him. A woman in her 50s stepped in, dressed in a beige suit with an FBI pin on her lapel. Her hair was streaked with gray, tied neatly back, her eyes dark and steady. Agent Miriam Haynes. She carried a clipboard but didn't glance at it. "Mr. Cole," she said quietly, "I wanted to thank you." Walker's statement confirmed everything. Pierce, the deputies, the supply routes, it's all coming apart. We're cleaning house. Raymond nodded, his voice rough when he answered. "Took long enough?" She gave a faint smile, not unkind. "Justice usually does." Her gaze flicked to Max, who had lifted his head again. "He's a brave one." "Braver than most I've met," Raymond said. "And I've met men who thought courage came from a trigger." Haynes studied him for a moment longer, then said, "You've done more than you know. Red Mesa's not the only place this runs through." "I'm done running through anything," he replied, tone even but final. "I've had my share of wars." She nodded, understanding more than she said. "Then rest, Mr. Cole. We'll take it from here." And with that, she left, quiet, efficient, leaving behind the faint scent of paper and cold coffee. For a long time, Raymond just sat there. Outside, the sound of sprinklers whispered against the windows. Inside, The room felt washed clean of violence. Walker stirred once, murmured something in his sleep, then settled. Max gave a small, contented sigh, his tail thumping once against the floor. When the clock touched 8, Raymond stood. He took one last look at the bed, at the badge catching the morning sun, at the dog whose devotion had rewritten the ending. Then he turned toward the door. The hallway was brighter now. Nurses laughed somewhere down the corridor, their voices light and human. Raymond walked past them, out through the sliding glass doors and into the open desert air. The heat met him, not cruel this time, but warm, forgiving. The kind that reminded a man that not all fire burns. He paused on the steps, closing his eyes for a moment, feeling the sunlight on his skin. Then he spoke, not to anyone in particular, not even sure if it was aloud or just the sound of thought escaping. Sometimes the heat remembers mercy. Behind him, the doors hissed open, and Max limped out, head tilted in quiet question. Raymond looked down, smiled faintly, and nodded toward the horizon. "Come on, partner. Let's see where the road goes." Together they walked into the morning. The hospital shrank behind them, the desert unfolding wide and endless ahead. The sand, once a battlefield, now shimmered gold beneath their feet. Max's gait was uneven but steady. Each step left a small, perfect imprint beside Raymond's boots. The sun climbed higher, painting their shadows long and thin across the dunes. Birds moved in the distance, small black shapes rising from the rocks. The world felt vast again, not hostile but alive. And for the first time in years, Raymond Cole didn't feel alone. Not haunted, not running, just moving forward, carried by the quiet rhythm of pause and wind. Somewhere beyond the next ridge, life waited, unwritten, undeserved, but his all the same. Some stories don't end when the mission does. They fade gently, like the last ember of a campfire, warm enough to hold, quiet enough to remember. Out here, in the long stretch of silence between heartbeats and horizons, courage rarely looks like what the world imagines. It isn't loud or proud or dressed in medals. Sometimes it limps through the dust on 4 legs, still breathing when everything else has stopped. Sometimes it's a man who chooses kindness when the world taught him to fight. Loyalty, mercy, and love. These aren't grand gestures. They're the small, steady choices that rebuild the world one heartbeat at a time. And though no headline will ever capture their names, the earth remembers them. The way the wind carries the scent of rain after years of drought, or the desert remembers the mercy of dawn. So tonight, if you're listening, take a breath. Think of those who keep watch in silence, the ones who protect, forgive, and stay. Because sometimes, the quietest hearts carry the loudest courage, and that is enough.